He used to have some kind of a bellows, and he could make the flames get way in the holes, and then he would melt his iron or get it so hot that it was red, and then he would make things out of it. And oh, I didn't see how anybody could do that. And you couldn't touch that stuff. He had to just use tools to do it. And one time I was walking with him to get the mail, and he broke a little branch off the bush when we went by, and got his knife out and started whittling, and pretty soon he handed me a whistle. He said, "Here, this is for you, it's a whistle." I looked at it, blow on it, sure enough, it was a whistle, a willow branch of some kind. You could slip the bark up and down on the hole after you had carved in it.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
That's cool. You know, they had to be smart because I don't think none of them ever went to school. I don't think Grandpa went past the 2nd grade or 3rd grade.
Grandma comes to the beauty school. She comes in and she gets a perm, and then she gets her hair done, and then she leaves. And then the student that was working on her runs up to me and says, "Miss Susan, that lady left without paying, and all she left was this big can of cookies." So that's my favorite memories of Grandma.
The old rail. Well, when we went to buy that car, that was, it's almost a funny story because the guy said, Dad asked him how much do you want for the car. And I think he said, oh, $50. And so Grandpa drove it home, $5 down and $5 a month. Well, I think it was about 3 months we didn't pay any because Grandpa wasn't working. They didn't, you know, back then they didn't repossess the minute you didn't make a payment. They were glad that they got rid of something once in a while. So anyway, we had quite a while, but we got it paid for while he was working at Lubbock. That's the one we drove to California in. I don't remember much about it. I know we slept in parks and we ate in parks. It's $10 or $5 or $10 a month payments on them. And it was over a year before we got it paid for. Let's see, Lucille was out there and she wrote us a letter and said, Lockheed, this big aircraft plant, is starting to hire people now. And if you come, you can stay with us if you find a place. I think it was 50-some cents an hour to start with, but you had to go to school a week or 2 before they would hire you. What year was that? Let's see. Dick was, we only had Dick, and he was born in 1939. So, well, Gary was born out there, so I guess probably about 1942 or 43.
I remember riding in the car with my grandma and standing up in the seat next to her without a seatbelt and standing up looking over the dash. And sometimes she'd let us sit on her lap and steer the wheel because that's just what you did. It was fun. No drama back then, no car seats and no seatbelts. There's like a halo on top of her head. I always used to tease everyone that it didn't matter if you did enough good deeds to get to heaven because it depends on who you know. So as long as you know, well, it's okay, I know Grandma Bourelle. Oh, well, then you're in. You know, you're set because you already got enough points.
Grandma cooks all kinds of cookies. My favorite? The oatmeal cookies. Those are the bomb. And the ginger snaps. Those are the bomb. And she always gives me cookies whenever I go over and do anything for her. Which is why I go over and do stuff for her.
We came out here in 1961, but we lived in California quite a while. My husband was in World War II. He was working at Lockheed when he went in, and his job was supposed to be waiting for him when he come out, but that's not the way Lockheed saw it. So he's got, the day that he went out there to get his job back, found out that it wasn't waiting, he had to start at the bottom again. He went by a place that said such and such wind machines, I don't remember the name, and it said hiring. So he went in, he got that job doing wind machines, and that's what he ended up doing here in the citrus groves. He would repair and build and install those wind machines.
Having lunch at Arby's and lunch everywhere, really, but, you know, hearing different stories of Patty's childhood and Gigi and how horrible she was and mean. She was super, super mean and about everything. So it's really fun to be with Grandma.
They still got that deer head. I wish Rusty'd come and take it. I can't throw it away. I was there when my dad brought that deer home. He and the neighbor brought it in, and well, my mother's kitchen probably was like that part. And they brought that in, laid that big deer on the floor. It almost covered the whole floor. The hoot run, jumped on it and held the horns. You know, he thought he was riding a horse. But my dad was so proud of that deer.
It is huge. You should see it. It's huge. Where
ran
is it? Is it still in your car?
No, it's in the, out in that shed.
You get
Jerry, I was going to let Jerry have it, and then I get to thinking, I can't give it up. I'm going to write Rusty and see if, at the time Hoot and Rusty had a terrible fight over it. They both said, you know, Dad wanted them to have it. When we lived in California, there was a pottery place called Gladdy McBean's, and you could get the apple pattern or the rose pattern. Now, Gayla's mother's got 2 cupboards full of the rose pattern. I have 1 piece left. When we moved out here, we sold them to the secretary at the place where Grandpa and I worked, because she wanted them, and we had to have money to travel with. But those dishes, we just got the ones, you know, they put them out. If there was any little tiny flaw in the painting or anything on them, they put them out there and you could get them dirt cheap, because they weren't allowed to go in with the real dishes if they had a flaw in them, because they were asking so much money. At least it was a lot of money then. It probably was nothing compared to what it would have been now. But we'd go down there, usually around 10 o'clock, they'd be setting out the stuff they couldn't sell and get them for, I had the whole set, didn't I? Whole set. I think I've got a lot to be thankful for. I still know who you are, and I still can drive the car, although that thing's been bugging me lately.
I don't ever have enough time to sit and listen to my grandma talk. You know, I wish that I had way more time, because then I would record her everything she ever said. Because I wish that I remembered the recipe for pie crust.
The first 3 years, I worked for my board and room. And for an old man and woman, he was a lawyer, and they lived 9 blocks from downtown, and that old man in his 70s or 80s walked to work every morning, come back and walked every night. But I had to do a lot of work, and I had to learn to iron because I didn't do it good enough, so she'd just dampen the shirts and put them back in the box for me to iron again. But you know, that was just training, because when we moved out here, I had to work at something, and so I got a job ironing. First lady said, how do I know you're not going to take, because I said I want $1 an hour. How do I know you're not going to take an hour to do a half of a shirt and 2 hours to finish it? I said, you don't know. You just got to try me and find out. And so she did. When she picked up the clothes, she said, oh, you don't mean you only want $6 for this load. Why? She said, I bet I paid $15 with somebody else. I said, well, bring your clothes back in next time.
The first thing she taught me to cook is homemade noodles. And I had her and Dad over for my first time I made them. And she didn't tell me to debone the chicken, so I served homemade noodles in chicken with no bones taken out.
And one time, the boss, wasn't the boss of the plant, but of our department, everybody was supposed to get a raise. He probably, you know, if you got 5 cents, you were especially good. But ever since everybody didn't get the same thing, he went around and whispered in our ear what we was going to get. Which was smart, because he told me I was going to get 5 cents, and then he told the girl on either side of me they were going to get 3 cents. And then when he left, he said, how much are you getting? Are you getting 3 cents too? And I said, yeah, because it was 3 cents plus some, but I didn't need to say plus. So I still didn't lie. I remember once winter morning we got up and it had snowed so much you couldn't see the road. But we knew that if we stayed in there were telephone poles and markers on either side of this road. It was a 2-lane road. So if we stay in the middle, we should not go down the ditch. But we did anyway, because I don't know what happened, that we got too close to 1 inch. And the car just slid down. It was just sitting down there in the ditch, you know. And so he was going to walk to town. It was quite a ways yet. But then the snowplow came. And he stopped and wanted to know what the trouble was. And we told him, he said, oh, you don't need to go to town, I'll pull you out. So he did. He hooked us up and pulled us out, and we went on to work. But you know, it seems like there was so many times when people needed help. somebody would be there to help, and you never ever thought about charging anybody anything. It just, I couldn't believe, you know, why anybody would want money for helping somebody else. It just doesn't make sense.
You know, not very many people nowadays have the same house that they've had their whole life, or their same furniture, or their same stove, for that matter. And everything at my grandma's house is the same as it always was. And no matter when, no matter who, no matter what, you never knocked. You just walked right in. At grandma's house, you just walk in the door. At her house, it's always just an open invitation. And you walk in and grab a cookie. Straight to the cookie jar. Every time I walk in the door, she always says, "There's cookies! There's cookies if you want a cookie. I just made cookies." So.
Well, we went to the park, and Grandpa pulled up behind a car to park, and Jack was in the car with us, Irma's boy. They couldn't wait to get over to the park and swing, so they jumped out and ran back here, and here come a car and hit your dad. You picked him up, his leg bent over below the knee. But that wasn't the worst part of it. They fixed it and they'd never done anything to even look at the other one. But Cliff stayed in the hospital with him all night, and he cried all night because the other leg hurt. And the nurse came in and took his toe and shook it a little bit, and it was broke. She shook his toe. She said, "What are you crying for? That leg isn't broke, it's the other one." So Grandpa made her go and have them come in and check it. Sure enough, it was both. They were both broken. About 10 o'clock, I called a lady that, well, at one time when we lived in California, her son came and stayed with us. I did not know her very well, but I did know her. And I told her what was happening. I said, "I cannot wait. I have to go to the hospital, and I got 2 little boys laying here sleeping. I cannot leave them alone." So she came over. She drove me to the hospital, and she went back and stayed with the boys until Bourelle didn't get there until 1 o'clock in the morning. I guess he got lost all over the country out there. Awful time finding him. And no phones. Nobody had phones. But I didn't stay in that hospital any longer than I had to. Every day I asked the doctor, "I've got to go home." And when I walked in the door, Gary come and crawled up on my lap and he said, "I didn't know where you was." It's awful when you got to leave little kids and Mom and Daddy both gone. I could trust you anywhere. We go over to see Kitty Hofstadter. She wanted me to look at something for quilting. And we walked in, and honest to God, there's a house full of antiques and glass and everything that's going to break if a kid walks into the room. And I walked in, and I just kind of looked that she was going to show me that tablecloth, and went over there. You were over by one of the tables, you know, picking up something and looking at it, and Kitty said, "You better not let her touch those things. She's going to break them. They're very costly." I said, "She will not break those things. You just don't worry about it." And you didn't. You looked at what you wanted to see, and then we went home, no matter where I took you. And I wouldn't have dared take Gigi outside of the room without holding her down. She could wreck everything. Dad, Grandpa made him a sandbox. And she went out there. I was standing here ironing, and I didn't think anything about it. And then all of a sudden the plane went over. And I looked out there, and there she was, in the sandbox, on her hands and knees with her head under the sand. She covered her head up as she went under, so she wouldn't have to get hit by that airplane. Oh, I thought, my God, she's going to, you know, she'll smother. I got out there and I shook her head and right. She was scared of noise, and that. She never talked to strangers, absolutely never. We had the nicest old couple next door, and they just loved her so much. But she never talked. She wouldn't say a word to them. And I guess maybe she didn't talk to us when we were around them, because they didn't think you could talk. And they had company one night for supper, and they were sitting at the dining room table, and you have to go in that door and then around their living room back to the bedroom. In their bedroom they had a little box of Patty with some stuff for Patty to play with. And they were eating supper, and the door opened, and in walked Patty, walked around the living room and back there, and the company said, "What was that?" And Mary said, "That's the little girl that lives next door. She don't know how to talk yet." So she could talk perfectly, but she would not talk to anybody. Well, that's the little girl next door. She don't talk yet. And then the time he let them all know when you could talk, Dale had his motorcycle out on the patio, and you were out there. I don't know what you were doing. Bill was out in his garden. and Dale started it, and it made a horrible noise, and you said, "Uncle Dale turned that thing off." And Bill went running in the house. He said, Mary, she can talk. She can talk." But my dad went to town, and he said, "Well, come home." He said, "Now you're 14 years old." He said, "You should be able to have a driver's license." Oh, he had a little Model T. So all he had to do was go and say, "I got a daughter that's old enough to drive a car, give you a license." You know, you didn't have to go take a test or anything. There wasn't that many people on the road that they ever were worried much about something. Anyway, that's when I got my driver's license. And first time I think that Dad was in the car, but I was driving. We were going to something at the church, and you had to go kind of down a pretty steep hill. And partway down there, some cows had got out the road. Well, don't you know I hit one of them? But just bumped it, knocked it off of the road a little bit, but she was still running, so. And Dad just laughed. He said, "Well, that's one of the lessons you gotta learn, boy. There's a lot of them when you're driving a car." My dad was always so good-natured. He was a really wonderful dad. I remember when I was 8 years old, he made me a milking stool. He was going to let me milk cows. And most people, when I tell them that, they say, "Well, you dumb fool. Just it's another job for you. Milking cows isn't that much fun." I said it was for me. I just was thrilled to death. We used to go to barn dances in the wintertime when there wasn't any hay, after the hay had been gone out of everybody's hay. We had about 3 farmers that had great big barns. And every Saturday night, everybody in the community went to a barn dance. And whoever happened to be there were musically inclined played, whether it was an accordion or violin or an organ or whatever. That was the music. And if toward the end of the evening, somebody would drop a few quarters in a jar, and that was their wages. You know, if they didn't get any, that probably wouldn't make any difference. They just enjoyed doing it. But I was really not very old when my dad asked me to know if I wanted to do the polka. I know where I went to Kentucky. That was the first time. And when we got on the plane coming back, I had to go to Chicago first. It was in Kentucky. Chicago, and it was storming, just awful. And I used to think, oh well, God, you're supposed to take care of everything. Don't you let this plane get hit with that lightning. And he did. Got to Chicago and I had to change. That was the first time I ever flew.